Busy time there now. How far are you into the convention? Now, are these from the business sector or educational sector?
It's all right. I like to stand as long as I can.
Y'all sitting up there? Y'all sitting up there?
Okay, let's get started. We have this meeting of the City Council. Madam Clerk, can you call the roll?
Councilman Duper.
Present.
Councilman Daly.
Here.
Councilman Brown.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tempore Popescu.
Here.
And Mayor Rigsby.
Here.
All present.
Okay, we'll begin with our invocation and pledge of allegiance. Please stand. We will proceed to immediately to the redevelopment agency.
In the interest of time, in order to make sure that certain individuals don't have to stay for the rest of the meeting, we're going to go ahead and start the RDA. We've already dealt with the roll call. Let's go ahead and have a report regarding closed session.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The redevelopment agency agenda items C1A and C1B were both real property matters where the board met and conferred with the negotiating representatives for the agencies, gave direction. There's no final action to report on either of those matters at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and go straight to schedule items number 2.
There's an item that I would like to pull, which is item number 3, please.
Okay, so that leaves us down to we'll deal with item number 2 and 4 and 5, and then we'll end with oral public participation. So we'll start out with item number 2, and we'll defer that to Mr. Bolowich.
Thank you. Item number 2 is a request for council to direct staff to enter into an agreement to assist the property owner at 24601 Redlands Boulevard. That's the old Cal Spas building. There's been two very successful, active, long-term businesses that have been here in town, recently relocated to that structure. Unfortunately, once they were in, upon fire inspection, and they kind of changed what they were doing a little bit and the materials they had on site, which triggered some requirement to install fire sprinklers into that building. So what we'd like to do is negotiate an agreement with the property owner to have the redevelopment agency loan the property owner the cost to install the fire sprinklers and have it be held by the property so that repayment over the loan is secured by the value of the property. And we do have the property owner here to answer questions or make a statement if you like.
Any questions from members? Seeing none, do I hear a motion?
I'll move the recommendation.
Second.
I should point out that this item did come up in front of the executive committee when we met last week, and we were in agreement with staff recommendation. We felt that it was worthwhile effort to try to assist our businesses in our community to ensure that not only do they stay here, but they prosper while they're in here. So I think it's a good idea.
The only question I have on this, and not clear from the report, is again the securement of our money if things go south. Can you elaborate a little more on some of the covenants and our security that we would have from the loan?
The loan will be secured against the real property. So essentially, and stop me if I'm misstating, we have our redevelopment attorney here, but I believe we'll be placing a lien on the property or placing a second mortgage on the property so that when the property sells, we're paid back, or if they default, we have recourse to the value of the property to recover our loan.
So that would assume that at least there is value if for some reason, unfortunately, they first got closed out on. What assurance do we have that it won't be underwater, so to speak?
There is no assurance on any of that, but it is, it will be secured by the real property. I don't know that a mortgage holder would put us in a superior position to their existing mortgage. But, as I said, it'll be secured by the real property. The property owner is also the owner of the business, one of the businesses there, who has been here for 10 years, has been in town, has been relatively successful. So it's not like we're subsidizing a startup business in this process either.
All right, thank you.
Mayor Rigsby, you made a motion, and I think Dr. Daly made the second. Do I hear any opposition, or do you need further questions?
Well,
Go
even
ahead.
though we don't have questions, I'm wondering if the landowner would, or property owner would like to make some comments about this.
Mr. Conrad? Sure.
I want to thank everybody for the opportunity to even be here. Mr. James Gray made this very possible. Let me tell you, he came up with not a problem. A problem is, I like rather look at it as an opportunity to get better at what we do. But he certainly had a solution. I don't know if this solution is going to work, but you know, we've been in business since September of 1999. We went through this last recessional period. It's pretty tough. We made it. We're stronger than ever. We're up 48% over this time last year. We're winners. This is about commitment and dedication. How many of you guys are married here? Okay. You know what commitment is? 33 years. That's my wife, Denise. Okay. 3 kids. You can Google any of them, and you'll read some very positive things. Okay. We pay our bills. We do the right things, and we want to put some people to work in this town. This whole situation didn't come up because I'm reaching out trying to get something maybe we don't have coming. This situation came about because, Mr. Mayor, you'd be very proud of the people you have in place, I think, if you knew how we got to this point. I'm amazed. I'll tell you what, to be able to work with the people that I have, pretty awesome. Another thing about commitment. You can go by 24601 and 24603 at 11 o'clock at night and drive to the back, and you'll see me back there working. You'll see me on Sunday out front, cutting the grass with a weed eater. You know, I've been looking at that building for 2 years. And me and my wife, you know, it's our dream. How are we going to pull this off? Well, we did. And then we got opportunity to get people. So, I just thank you for taking the opportunity to look at this deal here, and hopefully it works. And I will stand up behind what I say I'm going to do. We'll make it happen. Any questions? Please.
We could use some more owners like you if you have any friends or
Well, let me explain to you how. You know, before I signed the papers on this project, I knew I needed to lease either the front or the rear. So I'm thinking, okay, the back building doesn't have the exposure the front building does. Okay. Probably get more money for the front building. So what I did is I didn't want to wait till I signed the papers. I wanted someone in there. I didn't want to put signs up. I mean, that's been an eyesore for 2 years now. I went up and down Redlands Boulevard and went in people's businesses until I found one that was packed to the ceiling with stuff that needed to expand. I never met the guy's name is Guy, that the owner of Inland ATVs. Never saw him before in my life. Walked in, and I says, boy, you need to grow. He says, yeah. That's how I got that front building leased. I didn't wait around for somebody to come to me. I had it done prior to signing the papers on this property. So we make things happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering if he's considered a run for Chamber of Commerce position.
Great. Well, we wish you much success. Do I hear, we'll go ahead and have a vote. Do I hear any opposition? Hearing none, I think the motion is passed. We'll go on to item number 3 was pulled. We'll go ahead up to the item number 4, which is the minutes of the January 25th meeting. Do I hear a motion?
I move it.
I heard a first and a second.
Second.
Hearing no opposition, it's so approved. We'll move on to item number 5. Jarb, whether you're ready or not, we'll let you give us a quick report, which is regarding the agency-owned 60-acre Orange Grove. For those, just to give a little bit of background, it was brought to our attention that for a number of years, ever since the agency has owned this land, it was basically taken care of by a grower who, in exchange for the fruit, was basically managing the grow for us. He approached us not too long ago asking that we, because of the nature of the market, we would have to pay additional $3,000 a month. The mayor made a motion that we at least consider doing that for the first 5 months or 6 months, and we're now reaching that point. And Jarb's going to give us a quick report. I may add a few things to it, and we'll just kind of take it from there. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I actually have Mr. Jeff Peterson. He's my associate engineer who gave us a report on
go ahead.
this.
Mr. Chairman, board members, as you know, the Frank Ranch Citrus Grove is located on the 80 acres that the redevelopment agency owns. It's approximately 60 acres of citrus. There's about 7,000 trees on that. You asked what we could do about continuing to maintain it, if we might consider removing it, etc. Looking into what it's cost us for the last 6 months, we have averaged $26.67 per month. That's $2,667 per month in water. January, we didn't spend any. That brought the amount down a bit. We don't expect to spend any this month, February. March, depending on the rains, if they come, we may or may not be turning the water back on. With this, we looked at what it would cost to remove those trees and what the ramifications would be. We got bids for as high as $110,000. Our lowest bid was $81,000 to remove those trees. Unfortunately, what it also does is lend us to the opportunity for code enforcement to make sure that we abate the weeds that may grow, as well as dust abatement. So we did not calculate that into the numbers. We don't know what's going to happen to this property. This is the Area D property, bounded by Redlands Boulevard, California, Mission, and Mountain View. That area may or may not develop. We don't have a clear picture at this time. We're hoping that it does, but we don't have a crystal ball that tells us exactly what's going to happen. We're suggesting that at this time that we continue to water. That appears to be the least expensive in the short run, in the next 2 years. What happens after that, we're not too sure, but this is just a report to leave it up to you gentlemen as to what you see is the way that we should go.
Mr. Daly, you had a question? Go ahead.
I think we discussed this before, several meetings ago, correct? What is your estimate of the cost of watering these groves per year?
I would estimate about $25,000 per year.
Okay, and are these productive grows? Is there any kind of revenue that we realize from them?
Not that we have been realizing. The amount that is harvested, as was mentioned earlier, the manager has been doing the maintenance in exchange for the fruit that comes off of them.
Okay. And the groves surrounding those owned by the city are also being watered in a similar way?
Correct. There is one grove that has been changing over to a drip irrigation system. We looked into what that would cost. We were told approximately $2,200 per acre to change it over to a drip irrigation system. And being 60 acres, that's over $130,000. Because of the uncertainty of what might happen in the future, one of the items in Area D is that we are expecting, if it develops, to have a condition of approval for open space and or parklands. If this were to occur with development, we would ask that some of that land be a heritage grove, in which case we would want to change it over to some type of drip or more energy efficient, more water efficient system. But we don't know which trees that would incorporate. We don't know the exact location of where that grove would be in relationship to whatever properties that we would maintain at that time.
Maybe you can answer one of the other questions that's been posed to me, and that is that these trees are so old that they aren't very, they don't produce very much fruit any longer, and so that we're preserving old trees, and once it's developed, we would need to replace those trees with new trees anyway. What's your take on that?
That could be well the case, yes, sir.
And so basically, we're spending $25,000 a year to preserve old groves so that they look better until we figured out how we're going to develop the property.
Correct.
Thank you.
Are there any other conceivable options on the table besides the two that you painted tonight? I know there potentially must be some other ones, but I assume from your presentation don't feel there's any other really viable alternatives at the moment.
Going to address the weed abatement issue, going to address the dust control issue, having the grower maintain that for us is actually quite economical in exchange for the harvest that he's able to glean from the groves. It's a catch-22. There is a definite domino effect if you remove the trees and costs associated. And if you remove the trees, then there is going to be no money coming in from that, no costs, or it's just going to be expenses.
What if you just abandon the grove, so to speak, list the problems, disadvantages, and why that potentially would not be a worthwhile solution?
If we were to go ahead and abandon the grove, stop watering them, they would die. There's no doubt. We are in a semi-arid area. The deserty type climate is not conducive to fruit production without additional assistance from irrigation. Upon the death of the trees, they would slowly dry out. They are very dense and wet wood, but over time it would dry out. After it got to a certain point of dryness, the fire marshal would no doubt have opportunity for further training of his staff, because with the attractiveness of the homeless in that particular area, I can assure you that there would no doubt be an accident, and flames would engulf the area, and we would have more than likely another disaster.
Thank you.
I would add a couple things. One is you had asked for other alternatives. I have studied other alternatives, don't have a conclusion at this point, but we are looking at another option of someone else taking care of the groves. They think they might be able to do it without us having to pay any money for the water, and perhaps even give us a little bit of money for using the groves. Until we have a proposal on the table, it's hard to really speculate. We're looking at the opportunity, and Mr. Bolowich is looking at having a sponsorship plan in which someone else is going to pay for the water. In reference to Dr. Daly's comments about these trees, I've actually looked at them with another grower, and he said they're actually perfectly fine. It's not as good as they were, but they could definitely be sold externally, and there's other packing houses that pay good money for them. So there's definitely money to be made. The growth to the east of it, which it's owned by Ms. Kunahara, is actually producing fruit and is being sold. It's perhaps not the prime fruit that you see on some of the long Beaumont, but nevertheless. One other point I want to make is that one of the things that compelled me to come on this council was my concern over the fact that many of our orange trees were being decimated and taken away, and a lot of the times we don't have control over it if it doesn't belong to us. But this is actually an orange grove that does belong to us, and we are in complete control of it. Sometimes it does cost us money to maintain the beauty of our city, and I think I'm willing to place the bet that most residents don't mind us paying money to make sure that those trees are maintained. We're doing everything we can to decrease the cost and look at other ways to do it that we've done in the past. But that's kind of my viewpoint on the area. Anybody other comments or concerns?
I just had a question. What happened to the idea of someone cutting the trees and then taking the wood as payment? We just didn't find those people to make a bid?
Correct.
So do we need to take an action?
Yes,
or
please. I should have put on it, but yes, I would like some sort of
Direction
action
from
to see
us.
if you want me to continue Water Grove and,
Okay.
and
So I guess we'll open up for discussion. Any other council members want to express desires, interests, direction? Go ahead.
How about we give you 2 more years?
Is that a suggestion, a motion?
Take it as you like.
I'd be willing to second it. The only question I'd have, 2 years versus 1 year, or at least we could express the direction that if there's a viable alternative that somebody comes up with, I'm sure staff understands they'd bring that back.
Yeah, the point of 2 years was to look at it again, so I don't have
Sure.
any...
Yeah.
I
So-
don't have any-
I'll second that with the understanding that staff understands that means that they'll continue to explore alternatives as well. Thank
And
you.
I would take it that that alternative would be brought back to us, and if we choose to look at alternatives, then we vote to look at a different alternative. Go ahead, Doctor.
How about 2 years and 4 months, or to finish out the fiscal year, so you can have more sure budgeting? Would that be?
Well,
I would support either. I have no strong feelings on that timetable. I don't think it matters a great deal.
yeah. Any other comments from council members?
My only comment is that I know there are several people in the community and several groups that are interested in this issue, so that's all I was going to express, is just at least some time to allow them to weigh in on it. So I think we're good with that.
Yeah. My only other ending comment would be that I had an opportunity to go out there several times, and I've got to tell you, it is an amazing grove. It's actually, I know it's old, but it's beautiful. You walk through there, and you're in a different world. It is an absolutely amazing place. Don't want to encourage too many people from going on there because we don't want anybody to get hurt, but I'm really excited about someday being able to preserve some of that for generations to come, or we can put in some waste for people to walk in it and enjoy it. Go ahead, Dr. Daly.
I'm thinking maybe we should assign Councilman Popescu to go sell the property, because he seems to have a good pitch for it.
We don't want to sell it, do we?
I'm more comfortable with 1 year, but if you feel 2 years is better, then that's fine. But I mean, $25,000 is $25,000. I'd like to track that to see what progress we're making.
I have a suggestion, but go ahead, Dr. Rickman.
I have a question, and our attorney left, and, oh, he's still here. But are you on the clock? Will you throw us a freebie? My question is, this will be paid out of RDA funds. What happens if the RDA goes away? Then what? Will Jerry Brown honor this commitment?
Nobody knows. The budget does not have a word about how, should redevelopment agencies be eliminated, how real property, personal property, potential future revenue streams to redevelopment agencies, whether they're associated with affordable housing or not, will be treated. So that's mysterious. There's some comment that agencies would be managed by a successor entity. It's not clear what the successor entity would consist of. Comments by the governor's staff indicate that the successor entity would be in the business of wrapping things up, none of which is very illuminating on topics like what happens to real estate. Under current law, for a redevelopment agency established within a municipality, the city is the legal successor in interest to the redevelopment agency. If I were speculating, I would speculate that concerning land not acquired with low and moderate income housing fund monies, that title will go to the host city, in the case of a city. And regarding properties acquired with monies from the low and moderate income housing fund, I think it probably will be the case the same result accrues, but it's somewhat less likely given other language in the governor's budget that indicates that housing funds remaining on hand in an agency's low and moderate income housing fund would go to the local housing authority also being undefined. But we're dealing with a high level of speculation, and even as of this afternoon, to the best of my knowledge, there was not a bill which was commented on during hearings before an assembly subcommittee yesterday regarding the budget. People were noting, as certain legislators were saying, that cities should come up with a counterproposal. People were noting from cities that it was rather difficult to come up with a counterproposal when they had not read a proposal. And there is no bill that explains it. So that's the best I can do right now.
So Dr. Daly entertained the idea of perhaps limiting it to 1 year. I guess we do have a motion and a second. We can
compromise it a year and a half and get it to the end of next fiscal year. Why don't we just do that?
Okay,
and is that
year and
okay
a half.
with the
Would you
second?
be willing to amend? Okay, year and a half with clear direction to staff to look at all alternatives to minimize the cost to the RDA. Alrighty, hearing no opposition, assuming there's no opposition, it so passes. And I believe that concludes the RDA, and we'll go ahead and... Oh, I'm sorry, I guess that's right. We do have an opportunity for public participation on any items that was on the agenda or perhaps should have been. This is an opportunity for anyone from the public to come and speak and express their viewpoint on anything. I think Mr. Wiley would like to make a comment, and come on down.
Thank you, Dick Wiley. One thing you might check on, Mr. Knight, who's, I believe, head of the Redlands Foothill Packing House, you might see if there are any records of that area and sizes per year. See if there's cycles. What I'm thinking about with the trees, they're like humans. If I have one family over here that's pretty well off, eating real nice, and you have another one that's sort of on the poverty line, and you look at the health of those two over a period of time, what normally happens, if a grower is going to take the grove and make a living off of it, he will keep it watered, or it will be fed. If I'm not, I'm going to keep it alive. Well, that causes other things to come in, and it's like any person. The older you get, the worse you get, with the less you get. And this could be the same way with the grove. So they go through cycles. If you've gotten into citrus at all, you don't have the same size every year. Sometimes you have marbles or the little ones. Now, it used to be Japan loved little oranges. Nobody here likes little oranges. So the market was overseas. You get a good price for it. If you get the bigger oranges at times, the market's good. You'll make some money. But that's why I say if you look at a trend, and if we're in a trend that it's going down constantly, maybe it's time to get out. But if it's cycling it through, where are we in that cycle? So maybe you can look at, will we get some extra money? Maybe not this year, next year, but down the road. This is a thought.
Just to respond, I appreciate your comments.
Yeah.
My caution is coming from a perspective that I love orange groves, and I've enjoyed them for the 35 plus years that I've lived here, and I hate to see them disappearing. At the same time, we have tight budgets, and the city of Loma Linda is not in the orange producing business. So I want to be careful to be sure to balance those priorities, the city physical priorities and retaining future land use, and yet at the same time, I enjoy beautiful orange groves and tasty oranges as much as any citizen in the city. So, but I appreciate your perspective.
Thank you. I would only add one other interesting observation in talking to another grower. One of the things that he suggested, and it's something we may entertain, we'll see, is that one of the reasons sometimes the trees don't produce as much fruit is because there are too many trees, they're too close together, and they all compete for the same water. And he thinks that if you thin out the grove, actually you'll produce better fruit. So that's something that we'd seriously consider in the future. I should also point out that in the city of Blythe, on the outskirts, they're planting tens and tens of acres of orange trees. And the reason for that is because there's a huge market overseas. One of the things that it's been brought to my attention recently is that the highest unemployment rate, believe it or not, in the country is among some of the Central Valley here in California. And part of the reason is not necessarily the economy, but because some of the agricultural land up there has been limited to how much water it can have because of some court decisions up in the Sacramento Delta. So therefore, they're allowed less water. As a result, the growers of a variety of crops weren't able to grow the crops that weren't for domestic use, rather for exporting. As a result, there's a high unemployment rate. So there's always a market for things that we never think about. At the same time, I agree with Dr. Daly. We're not in the business of oranges. We'll do what we can to balance that with our own budgetary needs and the needs of the community. So thank you. With that, I think we'll go ahead and adjourn the RDA, and we'll convene the regular city council meeting.
I was just going to comment that we shouldn't forget to blame global warming, since that causes all other ills. Okay, we'll get back to the city council. Are there any items to be added or deleted?
Yes, sir. I would like to delete item number 1.
Okay. Number 1 is stricken. For the city council purposes, are there any comments from the public on items not on the agenda? Seeing none, I believe we'll have conflict of interest issues or questions, and that will come with our next item, number 2. We have a public hearing.
I declare conflict on item 2.
I think in the past, our city attorney has stated that membership at the church by itself is not considered to be a conflict unless you derive some kind of income from it.
The basis of my declaring a conflict, and I'm open to city attorney's advice, is that I chair the building committee at the church. And so I'm directly involved in this project.
Well, that would perhaps not constitute a financial interest, but it could be viewed as a common law conflict of interest or a bias. In the case of an entitlement application such as this, probably in an abundance of caution to avoid the appearance of a conflict, even though not of a financial nature, it would be appropriate to recuse oneself.
And we'll promise not to take too long, keep you back there too long.
Just along those lines, and I remember the discussion we had a year or so ago when this came up, it does seem somewhat confusing. The application is entitled as the applicant Loma Linda University Church. We asked the question a year ago, and I don't think ever got a completely explanatory explanation, but for years and years, the church was known as the University Church of Seventh-day Adventists. That was the official name. Sometime, I'm not sure it was actually official that it ever was changed, but now it seems to go by a different name, i.e. Loma Linda University, and it tends to make it sound like it's an entity of Loma Linda University, and I think that leads to some of the confusion of some that may view this to say, well, you know, why are you not recusing yourselves if it's a Loma Linda University application? So I don't know. I think it was clear the old name University Church because there wasn't the Loma Linda University associated with it. But just to be clear to anyone that's watching or happens to have an interest, that is the name that's currently being used, but it is not owned by Loma Linda University.
Okay, so I guess the rest of us don't have a conflict to declare, and Community Development has a presentation. Thank you.
I have a brief presentation. This is a project that was approved in September of 2009. The reason it is before the City Council is because it proposes to construct over 20,000 square feet, which then requires City Council review and approval beyond the Planning Commissions. So in this instance, the Planning Commission is an advisory group. The one-year extension of time would run through September 22nd of 2010 through September 21st of 2011. The proposal is to demolish an existing 3,300 square foot chapel, construct 21,500 square foot of church addition, and it is basically a chapel and or multi-purpose room combo. The new chapel and associated improvements are included: multi-level construction, multi-purpose use, an additional 900 seats, but with the seating that was removed, the net is 674 seats. This is the site plan, and you can kind of see what's being taken out and put in. I should mention that the project architect had intended to be here. However, I think he's sitting in an airport someplace in Seattle. But he did ask that we read a letter into the record from him, and the architect is Ken Schofield. It is, Dear City Council, we have requested that the Planning Department processes time extension for our project to enlarge the chapel/multi-purpose room at University Church. As all facets of the economy have been challenged in these past few years, the construction industry has been especially hard hit. Our project has been affected as well. Our original civil engineering consultant, Terra Solutions Incorporated, is no longer in business. They had promised to deliver the necessary drawings and documentation to meet the construction and city submittal requirements. However, they were struggling and decided to close shop throughout California. We responded quickly and contracted with Hicks and Hartwick Civil Engineers in Redlands, who have a long history with the city as well as Loma Linda University. They have performed well, but this change so late in our project and in the project development process has affected our ability to complete the required drawings per our original schedule. We have made good progress and are currently looking at building permits being pulled in the next 2 weeks. We are proceeding with allowable pre-construction activities, building demolition, and with full involvement of the building and planning departments to make as much headway as possible. Thank you for your consideration and assistance providing new facilities for the growing programs at the University Church. Sincerely, Ken Schofield, AIA Onyx Architects. So that is the reason for the request for extension. I can go on with the presentation if you'd like and just cover the plans and so forth, but you have seen it before.
Does anybody want to? We have to do a public hearing before
Yes,
any motions.
Okay.
But you can go ahead and ask your question.
Two quick questions. One is this project that's in front of us different than the one that we approved a year ago?
No, it is not.
Okay.
The code allows a one-year extension of time for projects that are not subdivisions. Subdivisions have a whole different set of rules, and they can go up to 3 years of one-year extensions. But our precise plans of design, conditional uses, they're only allowed one-year extension. And typically it's an extension to allow for problems with construction plans or just so they don't lose their entitlement before they start building.
I see. I guess that led to my next question is, they've already started construction, so I was a little confused as to why they would need an extension. Are they not allowed to complete construction
They
at
have
their
to-
own pace?
They have to, actually, they haven't pulled all their building permits yet. But
At least they're demolishing, I should say.
Right. They're only doing the demolition right now, and some ground clearing, that kind of thing.
So at that point, once they actually pull permits, we don't actually have an ordinance that says they have to be completed by a certain time, do we?
No, basically, in order for a project to vest, they have to be under substantial construction. So demolition doesn't really count. Typically, a foundation is not considered substantial construction. You have to have at least, stem walls up and some other improvements in, such as plumbing and whatnot. Vesting essentially means a substantial investment in the building process.
Okay. Thank you.
And they're not quite there yet, so they don't want to lose it.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. So staff's recommendation is that the extension of time be approved for the time period requested. And as I mentioned, the project has previously been reviewed, so there already is an environmental document on file that does not require any further review. And that's it.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. We'll open the public hearing. Is there anyone who has any comments on this? Thing's really loud. Hearing nothing, we'll close the public hearing.
I'll move approval of the time extension as listed in the report.
I'll go ahead and second that.
Okay, is there any discussion?
I would only hope that we continue to move the project forward so we can use the new building as quickly as possible.
Okay, is there any opposition? Hearing none, it's approved. We'll move to the consent calendar.
Let's call Dr. Daly in.
Okay, the consent calendar is there. Looks like the demands register has no conflicted issues. Okay.
Just have a quick question on one item.
Okay, go ahead.
Item number 7, I guess we're disposing of 3 different cars. One says wrecked. How did they get wrecked?
Just got in a car accident.
And how big of an accident?
The car is not inoperable.
And the occupants are okay and everything?
Oh, yes.
Okay. All right, that was it.
Okay, is there a motion on the consent calendar?
I'll go ahead and move to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
Any discussion? Any opposition? Hearing none, it's approved. We'll move to old business item number 8, Council Bill O-2011-03, second reading and roll call vote. Modifying wastewater rates. Public Works.
It's pretty much a second reading for what I presented last time to pretty much pass through costs for the city of San Bernardino sewer rate increase.
Okay. Is there any discussion about this item? I don't see a public hearing on the agenda, so there's no public hearing. That was last time. So now what we have is if the discussion is over, the appropriate motion would be to instruct the clerk to, by title only.
It would be to waive reading in its entirety. I would read it by title only, and you would adopt by roll call vote.
Okay. Is there a motion to that effect?
So move.
And a second.
I'll second that we move by title only and therefore go to roll call.
Okay.
It is entitled, An Ordinance of the City Council of the City of Loma Linda, California, establishing wastewater collection rates effective February 1, 2011, and repealing ordinance number 683. And you may vote.
And the yeses are farthest away from you. I'm not trying to coach you. If you want to abstain, it's the closest.
Just for the record, mine looks like a T.
Passes unanimously.
Okay.
I would only want to just add a quick comment. I know that we're always trying to limit the impact some of our decisions will have on the residents, even though this is not by our own doing, but rather the city of San Bernardino. Just for those who may not know, it increases their rates from $16 last year to, by 2012, it'll be $18.50. So it's about $2.50 more a month for 2 years.
This next year raises it $1. Okay, we'll move on to item number 9, Council Bill O-2011-05, first reading. Set public hearing and second reading for February 22 on a regulation for registered sex offenders. Mr. City Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you recall from our previous meeting, this is an ordinance that our Sheriff's Department is encouraging that we adopt. We discussed some modification to the definition of park, and I believe you have a handout with the proposed ordinance that includes the additional language that we discussed on page 2, paragraph E, the definition of park. Park means an open space intended for public recreational use where children regularly gather. Then we added, for purposes of this ordinance, parks shall include the Hillside Conservation Area and the Edison Easement Trail. So that was the modification to the language that was made. We also discussed preparing a map which would show the affected areas that we would be subject to the limitation. And you have that, I believe, in your staff packets and agenda packets. And you can see that there are some areas, although somewhat reduced areas of the city, where residents who are subject to these restrictions could live. So that's for your review. We'd be happy to address any further questions, but I won't belabor what we discussed at the last meeting.
I'm just trying to interpret the map we're looking at. I guess that we have yellow and light green, and the green area would be acceptable places where they could live, and the yellow would be within the radius, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, radius from the schools where they could not be, is that correct? So
Oops, I'm sorry. Jarb, do you want to?
Yes. The area that they can live in is the area not shaded at all, which is the kind of the west part of town.
Yeah, it's my worst nightmare. The entire population of new sex offenders will be in my neighborhood.
So basically it looks like the far east and the far west.
Yes.
It does bring up, the unintended consequence. We all rah when it comes to trying to, restrict any possible problems with some of these individuals. But is it really a workable solution to have just two little pockets in town? You do worry. I don't live in one of those, but I'd be kind of concerned if I lived in one of those pockets and you're pushing everything into those. Any thoughts in other cities? Any familiarity of how this has worked? Well,
I haven't been involved with enforcement of these types of ordinances, but as a practical matter, there are a couple concerns. The courts that have looked at these types of ordinances where cities have been sued The issue has been whether or not there is any place in the city that where residents would not be prohibited. And the argument is made that if you don't have any area that's available, then it is unfair and unconstitutional. Now, the fact that there is an area where it's possible does not necessarily mean that it would be practical for a registered sex offender to actually live in any particular house or neighborhood. These areas are already built out or occupied, and registered sex offenders may or may not have the resources to acquire property there, but that's not the issue that the courts look at. As long as there is some reasonable location within the city, the fact that sex offenders may not actually live there is not the relevant issue. So it may look like we're pushing everybody into a particular area, but the effect may not be that anybody moves there, but rather they're simply not going to live in other parts of the city. So they may be forced out of the city as opposed to congregating in a particular part of the city.
Just a follow-up question to that. You know, one of the definitions is the get the correct terminology, the child care center. I may not be using the exact correct terminology. And again, I may be ignorant and probably am. What could someone that owns a property close to one of these neighborhoods that currently is off limits open some type of facility, and then you would in essence exclude all areas of town and run into the problems you just talked about? Well, yes, a small daycare facility could go into a neighborhood, and that would prohibit any new registered sex offenders from moving into that area after the daycare center opens. But it would not preclude them from remaining if they've already established residence. So let's say somebody did, just for the sake of argument, open a daycare center, one right in the middle of the one area on the west side of town that's open and one on the east side. That would essentially remove any area for anyone to live. Would we be in trouble, or is this such a hypothetical it's not worth worrying about? Well, theoretically that could happen. We could have a proliferation of daycare centers that would prohibit any new residents who are subject to the registration requirement from moving in. Whether that would happen, we'd have to speculate. If it did happen, an argument could be made in court, but whether or not we would ever be sued is doubtful.
What kind of makes this confusing between the two maps, the existing map and the new map? You got to keep in mind this as we're looking at it as a council. We need to keep in mind our city boundaries. So a lot of that stuff's not even enforceable. And if you look at the previous map, it's almost exactly the same. I mean, there's a very, very small, insignificant amount of change that I can even tell. I mean, there's a little bit, but for the most part, we're already covered. Most of this area is already completely covered in the existing state law. The new map looks bigger because there's more shaded area just because of the increased distance, but if you look at the city boundaries, none of that's enforceable anyway. So it's really, my opinion is it's the same. I don't think we're changing much.
And that's very true, that most of the areas are affected by the state law, irrespective of the city law. But the city law would simply give another level of enforcement to backstop the state law. Again, this is a first reading. It's not a public hearing yet. We would introduce on first reading and set the public hearing for your next meeting if that's the council's pleasure.
Is there a motion to that effect?
I move that we set second hearing for Council Bill 20-1105 for February the 22nd.
And I'll second that.
Okay, is there any discussion? Okay, is there any opposition? Hearing none, it is passed. We have no new business, and we go to reports of councilmen. I can happily report that the Anderson-Tippecanoe Interchange project has received approval for its environmental document. So we are still on schedule for beginning construction by the end of 2012 and finishing by early 2014. And the next step is acquisition of properties.
I have a question now. I've been hearing about this project since I believe it was about 1997. I thought we already had the environmental impact study. It was a problem with the contractors.
Well, what we had was a multi-year delay because a consultant who was preparing the environmental documents as well as other phases of the project and coordinating it, that contractor was, let's just say, slow in getting progress. So there was a huge multi-year delay, and when that was discovered about 2.5 years ago, they were dismissed, and another consultant came on board that has proceeded apace and stayed on schedule.
Well, I'm not experienced in government. That redefines slow for me. But given the changes in the economy over the last 14 years, is any of the funding in jeopardy is the first question. Secondly, if we had funding 14 years ago, is that adequate funding to complete the project now?
Actually, it's the exact opposite of your fears because the funding is in place at $70 million, and if the contract lets as favorably as prior contracts in the last couple of years, we anticipate up to about a 40% savings over the prior engineers' estimates because construction costs have declined that much.
So procrastination can pay off sometimes, it sounds like.
It does pay off, but it doesn't pay off much to us, but mostly to Sandbag and the state and whoever else. Does our share go down proportionally with the decrease in cost of the project? Okay, so it would accrue to our favor, and I think we're out $3 million for the project.
Yeah, we are about 1/3 of 20%.
At what point would the project begin impacting traffic on the Tippecanoe-Anderson?
Late
on-ramp,
2012, if you're optimistic. If you're pessimistic, sometime in 2013.
And those plans are already well evolved, so we know how we would mitigate the traffic problems that it's going to generate?
Yes, the design is at 85% complete. The street improvement plan or the improvement plan. But then, yes, there definitely will be a traffic congestion during construction.
Because that's the number one complaint to the institution where I work is that intersection and parking.
Yes.
And it's going to get worse before it gets better, is what I hear you say. I think it's important that we communicate. We're a little ahead of the game now, I guess, but as the construction draws near, I think it's important that we communicate very clearly with citizens and businesses, including Loma Linda University and Medical Center, are going to need to figure out communication strategies because there's already unhappy people, and I'm not sure just how to do that, but I hope we put a plan together. What?
Smoke signals.
Smoke signals, okay.
I would just only add for those who perhaps may not be clear in how the process works. We as a city are not actually doing the intersection. It's being done by Sandbag, which is a organization made up of 20 cities. How many cities?
24 cities.
24 cities, and we have a seat
20 cities.
on that committee or commission. And Sandbag is the entity that has done most of the freeway projects in the Empire. So they manage multiple projects. Where we as a city are proactive about is ensuring that our project doesn't get delayed or doesn't get lost with many other projects. What had happened is exactly that, which is, yeah, we worked really hard on getting the money, however, it delayed and nobody followed up on it, and as a result, it fell through the cracks. Since Dr. Rigsby was put on the committee, we looked more into it. We had meetings with the folks of Sandbag and reemphasized to them how important it was that we get this project on track. They looked into it and realized that there were some issues, so now we're on it. Unfortunately, it's still delayed. Sounds to me like we already delayed by about 6 months. Hopefully, we were supposed to start construction middle 2012. Now I'm hearing end of 2012. But I recently was informed by an individual in the community that they had a family member who lives in the area that would be impacted, and they've already been notified by the folks at Sandbag that their property is going to be impacted. So there's a number of properties, not in the city of Loma Linda, but over on the other San Bernardino side, that will have to be relocated. And it was important for us to get this environmental document approved because now it gives Sandbag the green light to move forward with property acquisition. So it's a very, very critical stage. And we at the IVDA that Dr. Daly and Mr. Duper sit on are working hard to try to get money for improvements on Mountain View Avenue, because as construction starts on Tippecanoe, we think that some of the traffic will be diverted to Mountain View and impact that. So we want to try to get that project going so we can decrease the impact to our residents.
One other question, Jarb, is as you know that one of the issues that you and I have discussed based on comments I received in the election are the rather dingy-looking off-ramps and on-ramps to Loma Linda, particularly the eastbound exit on Anderson. Does this mean that if this project's actually going to begin in 2012, that we would hold off on that, or is there any relationship at all?
For Anderson and the I-10 freeway, yes, it's going to stay like that. The project does include the landscaping improvement to the interchange, but you have to wait till 2013.
Yeah.
Okay, are there any reports of officers? Or just item 10?
Yeah, there is.
Yes, sir, I have item 10, that Jeff
Okay,
Peterson, remember 2 months ago you asked me to bring back the item on Mission School traffic mitigation, and Jeff will present that report.
2 months ago, good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. 2 months ago, you tasked us with revisiting the traffic study for the Mission School. Without going into too much detail on the school itself, you may recall that it is a school that's historic in nature. It's been there well over 50 years. The school district has a need. They are overcrowded in their elementary school system, that the students are in temporary facilities, etc., and that they have been using that school recently for an adult school. What they are looking at doing is to remodel and refurbish the existing facility and expand it. The traffic study that they prepared for us was reviewed by staff, and it looks at what's going on presently, what's going on in the future, with and without the project. Unfortunately, the city does not have the nexus to set conditions for school districts. The school districts are under the officials up at Sacramento. The state architect's office does their review and permitting process. So we looked at their traffic study, and using the assumptions and the criteria that was provided, it appears to be a intersection that we all know is is less than desirable. With the current conditions, it's at level sub-sea level. It's at the E level currently. Without the project in 2012, it will continue to degrade to levels E and F in the morning, and then with the project, it will also be E and F in the mornings and afternoons. With the project or without the project, if we do improvements, the improvements that we have proposed, that JARB has designed shelf ready, it will bring it up to sea level. Unfortunately, many of those improvements are in the city of Redlands. That intersection is shared with both the city of Redlands and ourselves. We've looked at this particular traffic study. There's about 600 students that are proposed to be housed there at the school. We're looking at what conditions that we might place on it if it was not a school, if it was removed and taken into a commercial venture. And if that was the case, we would condition it similar to what the school is actually doing. There are typical conditions of approval, grading plans, street lights, undergrounding of utilities, street landscaping, sidewalks, curbs, gutters, pave outs, etc. They are doing the vast majority of those those improvements. JARB went out and secured a state safe route to school grant. For that, we were one of two in the area that were successful in this, and so we are currently processing those requests to get those dollars to do the sidewalk improvements along this frontage. The only things that we are not able to capture from them at this time are development fees. They are not subject to our development fee structure, and that is because they are a school and we don't have that ability. If there's any other questions.
Those development fees we would use to do what with?
The development fees are for a variety of topics, including the interchange, the street improvements, also water, sewer, storm drains, etc.
Mm-hmm. I think we all agree the intersection is extremely congested, and the road needs to be improved, especially now that a school's coming forward. Does it sound reasonable to you for us, even though they're not subject to our conditions, to at least ask them to try to contribute a fair share towards that intersection?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Not necessarily a question, but more of a comment for the public again, to remind them that this was a project that the City Council here was not in favor of, just because of the existing conditions, we believe, just make it an unacceptable area. I just happened to be driving down California Street this afternoon about 3:15 in the afternoon, a time when you wouldn't expect to have a lot of traffic, but a time you would expect that school would be getting out. And on a normal day, on a Tuesday afternoon at 3:15 in the afternoon, traffic was backed up from California up 2/3 of the way up, all the way almost up to Barton Road. And it took me about 20 minutes to get to the light. It wasn't a school day, imagine that, because there were no students present. But when they are, I imagine you would probably want to avoid California altogether, and I would hate to be a parent picking up their child there. So that's just a comment. But just to remind everyone and the public that I still believe, I think most of my fellow council members do believe, that this was just not an ideal location, and we made that opinion known.
I think our staff would probably like some direction with consensus of the council that we formally ask the school district to provide some funding to help improve the intersection, so it'll improve traffic flow not only for the kids but the rest of the residents. Would the rest of the council be comfortable with that suggestion?
I believe that's a good idea.
It might help with their truancy rates and their tardiness record. I'm sure it won't be helped by having that much traffic. It's in their best interest to fix the intersection. So it sounds like there's a consensus on that, so that can be the instruction to the staff. Are there any other items? Okay, then we're adjourned. Thank you.